All right, this house in Kent, Washington is listed at $600,000, and we're going to walk through a real mortgage quote to talk about what it would be like to buy this house if you have $75,000 saved up. Okay, because I know when you're first looking into buying a house, you're first looking into the mortgage process, it's extremely difficult to get a real sense of what your numbers might be. You don't know how much faith you could put in those online calculators or just any old online article that you're reading. So we're going to actually walk through a real quote based on real numbers, on live numbers, that should give you a more reliable sense of what to expect, so that by the time you actually reach out to someone in the mortgage industry, you have a little bit a better grasp on what's going to happen and where your numbers might be, and you're not just starting from ground zero entirely. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through a real quote. We're going to look at what your monthly payment might be. We'll talk about where the cash would go, how much would go to down payment, how much would go to closing costs, and then we'll talk about how much income you would need in order to qualify for the loan in this scenario. And then if you are wondering, just are these numbers actually reliable? So my name is Landon Buto. I work with Cleveland Street Mortgage, a mortgage broker based in Bothell, Washington. This is a real quote that we would pull on, that we have pulled on this house based on real numbers. It doesn't mean it's going to be the exact numbers that you're going to end up with. They are real numbers, but they're numbers based on certain assumptions that might not necessarily be true of you, and they're numbers based on interest rate today, pricing today, which might be different tomorrow or next week. So they are real numbers, they are reliable numbers, but they're going to vary depending on a few factors that we'll talk about. All right, so here's the quote, and I've actually made two quotes here just so that you can see, there's one scenario where you have $75,000 saved, and then I'm going to compare it to another scenario where we're using about $130,000 saved. Where we actually get to the 20% down scenario, just so you have some context of how the numbers change instead of just this vague idea of if I have this amount, what would my numbers be. So here on the right, we'll call this the 75K scenario, and on the left is the 130K scenario. And why did I pick 130? It's not just a totally random number. That number gets us to 20% down. So that is your cash all in that you're going to have. And again, we'll talk about where that goes in just a second. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail this time on each of the numbers. I'm just going to show you those main components, what your monthly payment might be, what that payment is made of, where the cash goes, and how much income it would take. If you want to get a little bit more detail on how it all works, on why the numbers are what they are, I get into that in most of these videos. I'm going to try and make, and feel free to watch those, feel free to pop around. I'm going to try and make this one a little bit shorter, but again, if you have questions, put those in the comments as well. I'll be happy to answer those there. In order to create this quote, I had to assume a credit score, and I'm using a credit score of 740. So in the $75,000 scenario, we end up, I'm going to start by showing you what our closing costs are, and that's why it explains the rest of the quote. So we have to save $11,472 for closing costs. $75,000 is your all-in cash. It's what you have saved up. But when you come to get a mortgage, you don't just pay for your down payment. You have to pay for closing costs as well. And there's various things involved in closing costs. But basically, it's universal. You're going to have to pay some closing costs. And for this price point, generally it's probably going to be somewhere for this price point, for this loan amount, it's going to be somewhere from $10,000 to $15,000 probably. I know it's a broad range, but at least it gives you something. But 10 to 12 specifically is pretty common for this price point and this loan amount. So we're seeing $11,472. So we have to set that aside from your $75,000, which means we only have what is that, $63,000 left? $63,000 left to work with for the down payment. So that'll explain why we end up with the number that we do. What that means is, okay, we have that $63,000 left for your down payment. What we end up doing is we use 60 of that for your down payment. So we end up just using $72,667 all in. Why are we not using the full 75? Well, you can see here we got to 10% down. 60,000 is 10% down. we can't quite make it to any meaningful threshold beyond that. Maybe you could make it, you could put all the cash down if you really want. If you just, I want to use this number, you can put all that down if you want. But to go from 10% to 10.5% down, or 10% to 11% down, really doesn't make any meaningful difference on your pricing. It won't impact, it does in the sense that it reduces the principal by a few $1,000s. It reduces your loan amount by a few $1,000s, which means you're paying interest on a little bit less money. And if you can get to a higher down payment percentage, then sometimes your mortgage insurance will go down a few bucks. But the point is, we couldn't get to any. If you could go from 10% to maybe 12%, or 10% to 15% down, if you had that kind of cash, then that would make a difference. 10% to 15% down definitely makes a difference on your mortgage insurance, and sometimes on your interest rate, and just your overall pricing. But a few $1,000s, that didn't make any difference. So we just stopped at $10,000 and said pocket the rest of that. So that's why we're doing what we're doing here. 10% down. Because we need, so that's $60,000, and we need the $11,472 in closing costs, and so what that ends up being plus these lender fees is almost $73,000 all in. So what's your monthly payment here? Your monthly payment ends up being $4,222, and there are 4 different components that go into making up that monthly payment. You have homeowners insurance of $125 per month. Now that's an estimate based on the price of the home and the area, but that's a pretty common number that we see for this price point of house, and for our area. $125 per month. We don't have a ton of major natural risks in our area, so homeowners insurance tends to be less than maybe some other areas where there is more risk to the house, but obviously the purchase price is higher. And again, that's going to depend on your coverage, on who your insurance provider is. So that will vary, but that's a pretty common number that we see. Taxes of $365 per month. You can get the actual number on each house that you look at. Typically, you can there's a link on Zillow to the county website for that property, and the county website shows the actual number for 2024. So you can look at the taxes on Zillow. Sometimes those are right, but they're not always right for various reasons. Sometimes they're wrong, so you can actually get that number, the exact number for the year you're looking at, for the property you're looking at from the county website there. So $365 per month, and then mortgage insurance of $95 per month. If you put less than 20% down, you're going to have to pay mortgage insurance. And that will vary depending on a few of the main factors are your credit score. Your credit score will impact your mortgage insurance, which again we're using 740. Your loan amount. Obviously, the mortgage insurance is covering the lender's risk if you default on the loan. And the larger the loan, the higher the mortgage insurance. Because the higher the risk, it would be a costlier default. And then it's also dependent on your down payment percentage. So if you are 3% down, that's going to be the highest mortgage insurance. If you are 10% down, that's going to be much better than 3% or 5% down. And then specifically if you made it to 15% down, that usually shows the lender there's not a ton of risk here, and it drops the mortgage insurance down significantly, but that number could be closer to $200 or $300 per month. If your credit score is lower, if your loan amount is higher, or your down payment percentage is lower. Principal and interest is the last component here. So that's just the principal is the loan amount, and then the interest is the interest based on the loan amount and your interest rate, which here we're showing an interest rate of 7.125. That is based on today's date, today's market, and it will obviously vary day to day. But again, that's not an advertisement. You're not necessarily going to be able to get that rate. It will depend on several factors when you actually come to get your loan. But that is pretty close to what we're seeing, just kind of as an average right now. So 7.125 is a pretty good idea of what to expect, even if it's not the exact number. So we'll come back and we'll talk about how much income it would take to qualify for this loan in 1 second. I want to walk you through this scenario just so you have a reference, even if this isn't you. I want to walk you through the scenario of, let's say you have $130,000 coming in and you could get to 20% down. How does your total payment change? How does your monthly payment change? How does it impact everything? So your monthly payment now drops to $3,723. That's compared to the $422 over here, and there's several reasons for that. One is we now no longer have mortgage insurance because we made it to 20% down. So that's $95 per month right away. That's knocked off. Homeowners insurance and taxes are going to be the same because those are dependent on the house, the home itself, not the loan structure, not anything to do with the mortgage. Although they are typically paid through the mortgage because that's just how it works. You can occasionally get exceptions, but it's super rare, and generally most people don't have an interest, have a desire to pay that on their own. They typically want to let the lender handle that, which is great. Principal and interest of $3,234, and now that is based on a loan amount of $480, and the interest rate stays the same. And so if you're curious what this section is, points or credit, you should look into that in another video. Basically, it's a way to use cash or take cash in order to take a lower or higher interest rate. So you can look into that in another video. I've explained that in some of my other videos, but you can just look into that on your own as well. So what that means is now we have closing costs of $11,230. It's dropped slightly because we have a lower loan amount, and estimated cash to close of $132,000. So if you can make it to that point where you can hit 20% down here, we now no longer have mortgage insurance, and obviously the monthly payment is going to be lower because you are paying lower principal. You're paying there's less of a loan to repay. But there's some actual hard costs that are actually gone now, like mortgage insurance, and then obviously now you're paying interest on a smaller loan amount, which means you're paying less interest. So that's how it changes if you can make it to that point. But how much income would it take to qualify for this loan? How much would you have to be making in order for the lender to approve you? The way it works for conventional loans, which is what we're looking at right here, is that the lender looks at your DTI, which is your debt to income ratio. And your DTI is your total monthly debts divided by your gross monthly income. Your total monthly debts is your new housing payment that you're trying to take on, plus any other monthly debts that you have, credit card debt, student loan debt, any other monthly debts. They add those debts together, your new housing payment plus any other debts you have, and they divide it by your gross monthly income, which is your income before taxes, and that number needs to be less than 50%. Now, this number is not always what you're actually making. It rarely is what you're actually making. The only time this really lines up with what you're actually making this year is if you are entirely salary. If you're entirely paid on salary and there's no other real components of your compensation, then this will just be whatever your number is, whatever your salary number is. But the number that the lenders use down here is often different if you work on commission, if you're paid entirely on commission or mostly on commission. If you work variable hours, if your hours are not the same every week, and they're not guaranteed. You're not guaranteed 40 hours every week. Your schedule changes every week. Or if you are self-employed or just any other pay structure that's less guaranteed, less consistent, then this number won't necessarily be what you think it is. So to get a sense of what that is, definitely feel free to ask any questions in the comments, but definitely just reach out to a loan officer and start to talk to them about your income, because that will give you a good sense of what number might be used down here in order to qualify for this loan over here. But whatever they end up deciding, your total monthly debts divided by that number needs to be less than 50%, and if it is, then typically the lender will approve you for the loan. So what that means is in this, let's look at the $75,000 scenario. How much income would you need to be making? Well, basically, if you have no other debts, assuming you have no other debts, we can just double this number, and that's your monthly income that you'd have to be making. If you have other debts, then you just add those debts to this number and then double it. But we're just going to use 4,222, which is 8,444. Nice clean double there. Okay, you need to be making at least 8,444 per month to qualify for this this monthly payment here. In this scenario, you'd have to be making 7,446 per month. I'll double check that. Okay, yeah, I got it right. 7,446 per month in order to qualify for this loan right here. So basically $1,000 more per month to qualify for this one. So that's one area where your cash can make a difference. Maybe you are variable or self-employed, or you work on commission, and this number isn't going to be what you think it would be. It's not. Maybe it's going to be half of what you're actually making and what you're budgeting for, and so you really need a lower monthly payment in order to qualify. So that's where that cash can make a difference. It might enable you to qualify for this one where you couldn't qualify for this one. If you want to get a quote like this on a house that you are looking at based on your cash or scenario, or if you just want to talk about your income and see how much house you could qualify for, or just ask any questions, please do feel free to reach out. All of our contact information is in the description below. If you want to know what it's like to work with our team before reaching out, you can check out the links down there. There's reviews, there are videos about what our process is like, and if it looks like it'd be a good fit for you, we'd love to have you reach out. We do loans in Washington and Idaho, and we love working with new clients, so please do reach out.